All right. Welcome, everyone, to another exciting LinkedIn Live discussion brought to you by Optiv, the cyber advisory and solutions leader. I'm Heather Rim, and I lead the marketing team here at Optiv. So, artificial intelligence, it has undoubtedly gone mainstream. And thanks to ChatGPT, we can't open our news feeds without there being a story on AI's impacts, the good, the bad, and of course, what it means for business, technology, and yes, cybersecurity. So, here today are two Optiv guests. We have first Randy Lariar, who leads Optiv's big data analytics and AI ML solutions and services team. He's often in the news speaking about security ramifications of widespread AI adoption. And as you'll hear, it's not all bad. I'm also joined by James Turgel, a former CIO with the FBI who now leads Optiv's board relations program. He guides boards of advisors through their cyber journeys in risk management and strategy, especially as it relates to emerging threats and capabilities. And certainly, AI is no exception. So, thank you, gentlemen, for joining us today. I have a number of questions to ask our experts and certainly welcome your questions and comments in real time here. And I'll do my best to weave them in throughout the conversation. So, I want to start off with framing the moment that we're in right now. We know AI has been part of our lives for quite some time with machine learning, deep learning, and natural language processing. Now, we fast forward to December of last year when ChatGPT became a household name. How should we be thinking about the magnitude of large language models and how our world is transforming right now? And I'm just curious too, is there a moment in history that you would equate to the magnitude of the moment we're in right now? So, James, let's start with you.
So it's funny. Thank you, Heather. It's funny. Randy and I were laughing about this question yesterday. About honestly, right? It's probably the answer to the question is the internet, right? The use of this technology as a force multiplier can be both good and bad, right? And from the FBI former FBI guy in the room, right? Let me kind of frame the answer in terms of the world we live in, right? This whole cat and mouse world of cyber attackers and cyber defenders. So I'm seeing this technology used right now to launch greater attacks, faster attacks with greater speed, greater accuracy. And with any new technology, there's going to be new attacks that will also allow a number of speed actions to older attacks. But what I'm seeing right now on the bad side, right, is prompt injections to expose internal systems like APIs and data sources and a number of different areas. Using prompts and queries to cause these large loops and large data questions. So these systems actually run out of tokens. You actually have a number of actions where the prompts are asking questions of companies that certainly stuff they don't want to answer, but also legally sensitive matters as well. But on the good side, I've also seen this deployed in a number of unique ways, right? A recent pilot project using generative AI was actually creating a virtual print server out there, right? And so this virtual print server actually lured threat actors. You could see it. It was basically a honeypot, right? It's the whole concept of deception, cybersecurity technology. So think about it this way: if we could be able to take this kind of technology, utilize a virtual print server, but now we can get our entire team to create like a virtual network, an emulated network. You can really throw the bad guys off.
Thank you. So, Randy, I'm curious for you. Do you equate this to the launch of the internet as well, or
Y-
something more?
It's funny when you work in data and AI and you tend to click on the articles I click on in LinkedIn and other social media. It just feeds it at you. It's a existing form of AI. So, every other post on my feed is about how this is, the new wheel, the new sliced bread. And so I'm mindful of the fact I don't want to add to that noise. However, there's definitely an industrial revolution-esque feel to this, where beforehand you had a set of things that took a lot of time to do, and afterwards, a lot of work could be accomplished by a much smaller group of people in a much more efficient way. And so, somewhere between the steam engine and the internet, we're falling somewhere in there. I think that that there's a lot. of just parallels we see in society as well, in terms of skepticism of new technology, of people who are quick to adapt to exploit it. And there's some patterns that are repeating, that are helpful from a historical perspective. As we think about how do we secure today, we know that there are certain historical patterns to look for, as well as the fact that every uh, employee and every good actor who's becoming more efficient with these tools, the bad actors are seeing the same economies and they're being more impactful. So even if it's the old-fashioned traditional things that we were talking about in November of 2022, it just becomes that much easier to do that and to get automation to take care of a lot of the entry level probing and attacking that was happening previously.
Absolutely. Well, it's interesting we talk about the news and just how this is just such a mainstream conversation today. And there's a lot of good that's being discussed, a lot of upside. People are super excited about it, how we can accelerate brainstorming, research, coding, problem solving, of course, communicating, and a ton of other benefits that people are talking about. But what I think we're not talking enough about is the risk side of this, which is obviously what we're here to talk about today. So, what should board members, leaders, CISOs, what should they be thinking about seriously from a risk perspective? And James, maybe we'll start with you. I know you touched on a few things with your opening as well.
Yeah, so from a board and C-suite perspective, right? Those questions are much broader, right? They're the 30,000-foot level. You need to look at what are those conversations to be had with them, where they're asking the CISO and the executive team the right questions, right? And so the problem here is, right, on the whole concept of risk, right? Acceleration of AI solutions, right, causes a lot of people to overlook both the cybersecurity and the business risk, right? And on a broader scale, think about it this way: the nature of these solutions alone, right, brings up new risk, not the least of which, the human-driven responses, guess what, can't keep up if we're doing this at speed and at AI scale. Security tools can't anticipate the new attacks, right? Because unless they get reconfigured by the humans, right? But it's also coming down to boards are becoming more savvy with the new rules and regulations coming out, especially on the cybersecurity side. So it's one of those things where you really need to. They're starting to ask questions about what is the inherent risk of the actual technology, right? And they're trying to understand what it is, right? So what are the algorithms, right? The whole concept of risk and self-corruption of these algorithms. The whole concept that many machine learning algorithms, like the deep learning ones, they leverage this huge amount of data, but you're not necessarily, if that data is corrupted somehow or it's deceivable, right? It's the whole kind of garbage in, garbage out theory. And so, and board members are reading this and they're hearing this. And so they need an organization to literally bring them into how does this work? What are the algorithms like? Again, Randy and I both talked about it, right? New attack vectors, threat actors are going to manipulate this to both positive and negative. And it takes the whole conversation. And when I'm with boards, I talk a lot about, data ecosystems and attack surface. And data protection is a bigger conversation to have now than it was before, and it was huge. And then the final thing that I think is really unique about this type of learning is bias, right? There's bias in a lot of these algorithms, whether it's intentional or unintentional.
Randy, how about for you from a risk standpoint?
Absolutely. I mean, it's you have the ability to go so much faster down a windy road, but you still need guardrails. And I think that one of the things that CISOs, boards, executives that we speak with, there's a lot of pressure and interest right now because everybody sees the cost saving, the cost takeout, and they can see that normal distribution of if we do these things, we see these results. But on the risk side, we're also thinking about that tail risk of what happens if the automation exploit it. You can save 90% of your business expenses, but what if in doing so you enable a business ending event? So the savings aren't as valuable then. And so I think it's important to think about those failure modes. I think it's also important in this moment, and like I alluded to before, AI and and machine learning, they're not new. And even, GPT-4, which is incredible, is an incremental step over GPT-3, which was doing incredible things for 2 years without the same level of attention. But something about 2023, about the investments that have been made in the space, the attention that ChatGPT has gotten, and the realization that this technology is at a stage where it can be reliably used for a lot of business processes, means this is a really good time to sit up and think about not just the positives, but also, who are the stakeholders from a risk side, from a cyber, from a legal, from a privacy, compliance. This is just like any other, business process. It needs to be controlled. It needs to be monitored. It needs to be governed by stakeholders to make sure that people are going into this new technology with their eyes open.
I want to stay with that for just a minute, because my next question was really around, how do you determine how or where to wade into this water? It's like you hear some folks, they're all in, it's open for everyone. Other organizations are banning the technology altogether. Are there some questions that you should be asking? You touched on a few of them that would help you just understand what the right sort of risk appetite is within your organization, or your readiness to head into this direction.
Yeah, we advise our clients to build, a backlog of use cases, both to help prioritize what to build next, as well as to keep sense of, where AI is in your business after it's been implemented. Because these things don't necessarily, although they can do automation, they can corrupt and they degrade over time, even under normal kind of wear and tear. So it's important to know where AI is driving your business process. But I think if you look at the business processes that you might introduce AI to, how critical is it? How important is it that if something goes wrong here, you're out of business or your CEO's in jail? How important is it from a value? Is it going to transform your business and pull you out of a tailspin and reinvent your business, or is it going to make somebody's life a little bit easier? I think that there's a number of dimensions, and it can change with slight differences for clients and sort of the regulatory and the business position they find themselves in. But it ultimately comes down to, you want to do the use cases that provide more value than they introduce risk. And especially in these early days, you want to keep the risk low and just understand the technology, understand the frameworks and the different ways that you can use AI responsibly, that you can understand what it's doing. Big advocates of monitoring absolutely everything that you do with these models, because they can be trained on large data sets, or even in the cases where they're on smaller data sets, it's difficult to know what a deep neural network is doing and how it's working. And there's some state-of-the-art research, but there's no one silver bullet answer. And so keeping track of what it's doing, thinking about controls, thinking about what happens if the automation fails. These are all things that you should ideally do in advance, and then start to build the ones that are the lowest risk, and build up the organizational muscle to be able to deploy and defend AI.
I love that. I mean, it's so interesting. You just named so many things that organizations should be doing, and yet you're seeing organizations jump right into this almost blindly. So there's a lot to learn here, and a lot to consider. James, when you're talking with board members in particular, like what questions are you encouraging them to ask of their organizations to help gauge where they should jump into this?
Yeah, so I do a lot of cyber, war gaming, and I was just with one of our clients that, very, very large agri-food business. And it's honestly, I take a step back with them, because while the CISOs and the information technology folks understand the answers to these questions, I need boards to think about it in a different way, right? Does your enterprise know and understand its data flows and locations, right? Does the enterprise have the personnel to actually do and understand this, right? Or the ability to seek expertise outside, with outside vendors like us, right? And do they actually know where their data is stored? I can't tell you how many times where I'm working through a simulation, and one of the executives, we pop a particular simulated tragedy or problem, and we start asking, well, where's the data for that? And they don't know, right? And so it's great to be able to use this kind of tool with your data sets, but an actual organization, enterprise, has got to know really where that is and the type of data, and be able to secure it appropriately as well, because you don't want that data being out in the wild.
Big conversation about copyright, privacy, and
Yeah.
using models for commercial use, a lot of organizations are looking to train their own large language models, which is a very it's open source technology. It's doable. And there's a lot of different variations that have spun off since GPT-4. But one of the inputs is, what data do you own, and can you use it? And
Yeah.
just knowing where your data is and what rights you have to it is not a trivial task. And so it's like the tip of an iceberg. Everybody wants AI, but under the water, there's a lot of data, there's a lot of IT, there's a lot of governance and coordination that needs to be done. And so, again, the advice is always, you walk before you run. There's plenty of walking to do, and there's an unending amount of work you could be doing data organization till the next century, and you won't necessarily be finished. But prioritize on what the key use cases are. Make sure your data is clean and understood for that, and build those controls in place.
Yeah, no, that's actually, you touched on something, Randy. The whole concept of making sure that the data, because guess what? Those data models, right, are created by humans, right? So you've got data labeled by humans, so the algorithm can be taught, what it's searching for and how to finish the sentence. And again, all based on humans. So it's difficult. You got to have the right people with the right data. And then there's also the development of the models that detect patterns, but it's all about, like you said earlier, right? The training data, the data sets, and making sure that you've got kind of the right package together.
Yeah, as fun as this technology is, it's all people all the way down, right?
It really is.
It's important to get the people in line, and then the technology is amazing.
Yeah.
Well, and so in this conversation here, we've touched on some of the best practices. Are there any others that you would want folks to be sure to consider as they're looking at these models and the implications for their organizations before we jump into the pitfalls, which I know there are many that we want to talk about as well?
At a really high level, I sit there, especially when I'm talking with boards, because it's all about governance, right? It's buying down risk and using policies and governance. And honestly, right, developing those clear usage policies to be able to, specifically with Chat GPT and other AI tools. And I can't stress enough with them, implement really good access controls, right? Restrict the access of who gets access to it, right? So you don't want unauthorized personnel who are taking and utilizing this technology, because this could create insider threats, insider risks at an alarming rate. Secure the communications. I talk a lot about encrypting the chatter and the movement of comms between both your users and the technology itself. Again, because you're trying to make sure that you're securing it, monitor it, audit it, right? Use all those things that we should be doing with other parts of our business. And Randy hit on it. Stay up to date, right? This is evolving at, GPT-4 just came out, right? So this is alarming. It's increasing and enhancing itself at an alarming rate. And, what you do today, what policies you set today may be literally old at midnight tonight.
Yeah. And I'd add too, those are all excellent points. And often along with policy comes training. And I think that one of the things that CISOs maybe hope is that if they don't allow access to ChatGPT, then perhaps they'll be okay. But the reality is, it's coming into Microsoft products. It's part of Bing Chat. I'm sure it'll be part of Google before long. It's expanding at a too far of a rate. It'd be like asking a modern employee not to use their web browser or email system. And so training and clear expectations, making sure that folks are aware of the policy of what is and is not allowed with these tools. And then, enforcing through access and through monitoring that, if people do not follow those rules, there's just real world consequences of doing your job and being evaluated that way.
Well, and I think a lot of what you're recommending here also has, the negative side associated with it as well. So we've touched on these pitfalls, but I'm curious, are there any others, any big watch outs that you would want to communicate to our viewers today as they head into this new world?
Well, so everybody has seen some pretty shocking examples of hallucination, from these models. They can come up with facts that aren't actually facts, and like some consultants can just speak with authority, without the facts behind them. I mean, it's important in everything you do that you're thinking about the primary source of the information, even if it comes out of a chatbot. That there's thinking and there's work and there's research that goes behind, especially if it's client facing. It's important to show up as humans, again, with AI tools that help you accelerate but don't replace you. That's not really what these models are capable of doing. So, first and foremost is prompting them and designing them in a way that they are helping you do your job, but not necessarily thinking for you. That's where a lot of really bad mistakes have happened. A lot of people are using them for development, which is awesome. But if it's been trained on code and instructions from 2021, then any vulnerabilities in that code or known exploits are going to be very easy to find if you just copy paste that code into production. So a secure DevSecOps process, a code review of a human intervention, and other things in there to make sure you're not just copying stuff from a model into production is critical. So really just being mindful of the fact that these are accelerators, but they are not, at least in their current state, replacers. It's important to think about the processes and the things you design, and always keep the human and the real world experience element aligned with that.
Yeah, you touched on it earlier, Heather, about fear, right? So fear of AI, and these algorithms, I think, is unfounded. But guess what? Fear can impact decision makers, and fear can impact decisions and how companies actually utilize this, right? So, and it's as Randy talked about earlier, right? It's the promise of AI, augmenting this human computer, this human intelligence experience, right? I liken it to me, this helps a doctor make better, more accurate, and more timely diagnoses, not automating the doctor out of the picture, right? And so it's being able to, and technology is, we've talked about it for years. I mean, even back to the first industrial revolution, right? Since the dawn of the industrial age, technology, there's always been a fear of increasing automation would take away jobs. And I can guarantee you, throughout history, it's shown just the opposite, right? Consistent innovation absolutely produces more jobs than automation would have displaced in the first place. So there is a fear, but I think it's unfounded in certain areas.
So, speaking of fear, so if we go the opposite way and we think about how should security teams really lean into AI, even as they think about how they can apply it to their cyber programs, what's like the ultimate vision for how that should look? What would you like to see in that space?
There's so many exciting use cases coming forward, especially that impact cybersecurity. For one, we've been talking about the 3.5 million missing people in cybersecurity that just to do our job today needs to be filled. And a lot of those people would be doing things like looking and triaging first level, alerts, or writing new detections into a SIM, or trying to make sense of different pieces of malware. There's great examples of AI being able to help translate and transform how folks are interacting with their technology environment. So if it's anything from why am I getting so many false positives on this alert, and having a conversation with that detection versus the ability to need to know every nuance of a Splunk query. There's conversations about converting from one data set to another, to applying things like the MITRE framework to logs and to information that we see. Writing emails, of course, is important. All the different things that happen in automation. Again, not necessarily saying it should drive as the trigger for your automation, but it can help craft the messages, or help to say, given certain inputs, draft the email to so-and-so or so-and-so's manager about what's going on in the organization. And just play a general, customer service role for cybersecurity as well, of simple queries, things that, might be able to be handled by, I always talk like, if you're going to hire an entry level person or an intern anyway, to fill some of these empty seats, they're going to need to be trained. They're going to need to learn how to do the things that we do in cyber, except now they have the opportunity to use an AI tool to help them train, to help learn, and help them become more impactful from day one, and potentially get a lot more work done with fewer people.
Yeah, and I take this from the board and the C-suite perspective. Look, AI is different. We've talked about it this entire time, right? It's different than other technologies, and it changes the need that for routine work. so fast that the job creator people or the actual creation in economy, I don't think can keep up with the rapid change of what it could displace. But then I have a number of conversations about that rapid displacement piece. And I just talk to boards about, look, you need to assume that there's going to be less demand for those routine jobs and more demand for positions, right? I was the head of HR as well at the FBI. It's all of those things that an AI cannot do, right? That requires a human, right? Empathy, creativity, rapid comprehension, intuition, right? What are all those things, right? This is a great tool, but it's also, right, it can't take the human out of the equation. And so planning for that, right? Boards need to plan for that workforce and how they should be thinking about it and moving, 6 months, 1 year, 3 years down the road. So start thinking about it differently that way.
Awesome. Well, I know we are almost out of time. I'd love for each of you just to share maybe the one thing that you hope our audience today takes away from this conversation. And Randy, let's start with you.
Sure. Well, I think that if you haven't yet had an opportunity to try these tools out, it's certainly worth taking some time to just familiarize yourself. Again, ChatGPT, what it does isn't necessarily new, but it's so much easier than the old version of having to spin up a data science environment, train a model, and learn Python to get it to work. So definitely play with the technology. Educate yourself, and look for opportunities to understand what it can do, what it can't do. Be a more informed citizen of your organizations, as we're all trying to tackle together what the AI revolution is going to mean.
Awesome, James.
Yeah, as far as me, it is all about getting the right message out to all of your employees, right? When I talk with boards, right? This is a technology, cybersecurity, cyber risk, right? This is a holistic all across the organization, mailroom to boardroom, boardroom to mailroom, right? There has to be everybody needs to be using this in the appropriate way. There has to be all of those controls that Randy and I talked about earlier, but right, don't fear it, right? Don't fear the technology, embrace it, right? Work through it. Make sure that we're understanding it from the lens of what it can and cannot do for that organization, and then just run with it.
Awesome. Well, thank you both so much. This has been a great conversation on AI and its intersections in cybersecurity and business. And thank you to everyone for tuning in for our LinkedIn Live session. We certainly hope you'll join us for our next one. And of course, if you're interested in learning more about the current state of AI and cybersecurity best practices, you can go to optiv.com to view our resources, including a new blog post on this very topic that is there waiting for you. And you can certainly reach out to any of us here on LinkedIn. So thank you all so much, and we'll talk to you again soon. Thank you.